Hello students, I hope you are doing good. Myself Pratik Kadam, Assistant Professor, Department of Information Technology, KK Institute of Engineering, Education and Research, Nasik. Welcome to the lecture series on subject Information and Cyber Security. And our today's topic is Information Security Risk Management. So let us first discuss what are the learning outcomes of this video. So at the end of this video, you will be able to understand the risk management process. You will be able to identify risk of a given infrastructure. You will be able to assess the identified risk. And finally, you will be able to provide risk control strategies on the identified risk based on assessment. So let us start. So there might be numerous questions coming in your mind. What is risk? What is risk management? And what is information security risk management? So let us deal with these questions one by one. So what is risk? So a risk is a chance, high or low, that any hazard will actually cause somebody harm. So maybe during exam time, if you are not studying particular unit, then that is a risk. Because if there is a huge weightage on that particular unit, then you might not score good in your exams. So then what is risk management? So whatever things you do to overcome your risk, that is risk management. So now, most important, what is information security risk management? So it is also known as ISRM. It is the process of managing risks associated with the use of information technology. It involves identification, assessment, and control strategies to confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an organization. So the end goal of this process is to treat the risk according to the organization's security planning or risk tolerance planning. So any business shouldn't expect to eliminate all risk, rather they should seek to identify and achieve an acceptable risk level for the organization. It simply means that you cannot avoid all risk or you cannot mitigate all risk. So you need to prioritize your risk depending upon your assets, and then you need to see which risks are more crucial, then you need to solve them, and the risks which are not crucial or which are beyond your capacity, you just need to accept those risks. So now let us understand the stages of risk assessment process. So the first stage is identification. You need to identify your risk. The next stage is assessment. After identification of different risks, you need to assess them and prioritize them. And finally, control strategies. So whatever risk you identified and assessment you have done, depending on those, you need to provide a control strategies for those. So now let us understand risk management process in detail. In this case, I'll be taking an example of cloud computing industry so that I can better explain you risk management. So the first step is risk identification. In this, first step is identifying assets. So you need to know what data, systems or other assets would be considered as important to your organization. For example, which assets would have most significant impact on your organization, and if their confidentiality or integrity is broken, what harm it can cause you. So you need to list down your assets. So in case of cloud computing, the most important assets is your data center, your server room. So that is your most important assets. After that, then it comes your network operation centers. That is your network room through which you're monitoring your data center. Then comes your security operation center. After that, then comes your support team. And apart from all this, your building in which your company is set up, that is also an important asset, because if it is damaged, your whole infrastructure would be damaged. So in this way, you need to identify assets. Apart from this, the components like what server you are using, what operating system you are using, they are also an asset for your organization. So second thing is you need to identify vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities could be system level, operating system level, which are putting your confidentiality, integrity and availability at risk. So for example, if we just take like if you're using servers, then you need to know which operating system is installed in it, whether it is an updated operating system, whether it is not updated. If it is not updated, have you applied a patch, a security patch to it? So these are vulnerabilities they need to identify. Next thing is you need to identify threats. So threat is anything that exploits your vulnerability is threat. So you need to also understand that if you're using, suppose, operating system 1.0, so what are vulnerabilities to that operating system, and if those vulnerability is exploited, what harm it can cause. So there are many ways, like some vulnerabilities might be quite dangerous and some might be very minor, so you need not have to give very much importance to those minor things. You can simply avoid them using firewall and other things by filtering your data. And the last step is identify controls. So we are not talking about applying controls, so you need to identify controls that are right now available with your organization. That is, do you have firewall, do you have proper maintenance of your server room, does your building have security, are there proper authentication whenever someone is entering your server room or network room. So these are the controls that you need to identify and list down. So the next process is assessment. So this is a process of combining your information you have gathered about assets, vulnerabilities and controls to define a risk. There are many framework and approaches for this, but you will probably use some variation to this equation. So this is just a simple formula, not exactly the right formula you can say, but a simple formula that you can use to identify or assess your risk. So risk is nothing but your threat into vulnerability. So vulnerability is divided into two parts, like exploit likelihood into exploit impact into your asset value minus your security controls. So it is just like, suppose we are talking about an outdated operating system. So what threat do we have? Then what is exploit likelihood? Like example is whether it is very easy to exploit it, whether it is hard to exploit it. Then comes your exploit impact. So suppose if that vulnerability is exploited, what is its impact? Will it shut down your entire system, or will it damage a certain part of your particular system? Apart from that, we multiply it with your asset value, what is the value of that assets, and then we deduct your security controls. So this is just a simple example, like how we calculate a risk. This is not exact formula. Every industry or every organization would have its own mechanism or formula to calculate risk. So once you have done the assessment, then you need to go further, but you need to take care that you need to calculate an assessment for each and every identified risk. It is not that you are calculating an overall risk. Whatever risk that you have identified, suppose there are 10 risks, so you need to assess this 10 risks, prioritize them according to their risk impact, and then pass it to your next step. So the next step is risk control strategies. So once a risk has been assessed and analyzed, an organization will need to select a treatment options, or you can say a control strategies. So there are different control strategies. So let us see them one by one. So the first one is remediation. So in remediation, we implement a control that fully or nearly fully fixes the underlying risk. So it means that whatever risk is there, we are completely trying to solve those risks, or we are completely trying to fix those risks. So an example could be, you have identified a vulnerability on a server where critical assets are stored, and you apply a patch to that vulnerability. So this is nothing but a remediation. So whatever risk is there, we are trying to completely cure it. This is the first control strategy. The second strategy is mitigation. So mitigation is like, we are not completely overcoming your risk, but to some extent we are doing it. So it is just like lessening the likelihood or impact of a risk, but not fixing it entirely. So example could be, you have identified a vulnerability on a server. Again, there is a critical issue. So rather than applying a patch to it, what we are doing is we are applying a firewall rules. So rules are set in such a way that we know how that vulnerability can be exploited. So what we are doing is, suppose it is exploited on certain port, so we are filtering that port. So in this case, we are not totally patching that vulnerability, but we are just mitigating it. We are trying to lessen the impact or lessen the possibility of any attacker to exploit that risk. So this is your mitigation. So the next is avoidance. So avoidance means removing all exposure to an identified risk. So basically, just I have talked to you in last example. So in mitigation, what we are doing is we are filtering your ports, whatever traffic is going. So if that port is vulnerable, or if that port is a way through in which an attacker can enter and exploit your vulnerability, so we are filtering it so that no one can do it. So in avoidance, what we are doing is we are completely blocking that port so that no one can use that port. And if that port is only blocked, it means, yeah, we are totally avoiding that. So again, an example could be, you have identified a servers with operating systems that are about to reach an end of life and will no longer receive a security patches from the OS creator. So you know that this servers are now out to date. So what we are doing is whatever critical data is available on that server, we are taking it and migrating it to a new server, and whatever data which is not that important or which is of less important, we are shifting it to this old servers. So in this way what we are doing is we are avoiding it. We are not solving the problem, we are not updating a server, we are not buying a new server, but what we are doing is whatever critical data was on that server, we are taking that and now migrating it to the new server which is more updated and having security patches available. So in this way we are avoiding that risk. So the next is transference. So this is interesting. So in this case, that particular organization, for example, if we are talking about XYZ organization, that organization will do nothing about that risk, but what will they do is, but they will give all the risk solving procedure to other organization. So it is like, if you just an example, for example, if you have an sbi.co.in, so SBI is one organization, but when it comes to your when it comes to its website security, then they will not do website audit or penetration testing, but they'll hire an company which is having a specialization in that. They will have a contract with them and they will give all website security work to that organization. So in this way they are dealing with risk, they are trying to solve risk, but they are not doing it. What they are doing is they are transferring it to someone else. So I hope you are getting it. Like, they are not solving it, but they are giving it to another organization to solve it. So they are transferring their problem to someone else. For that they are paying them, but then now the total responsibility is with that other organization. Apart from this, there can be, you purchase an insurance that will cover any losses that would be incurred if valuable systems are exploited. So this is again transferring a risk. So basically you are not taking care, like, it is like you are not worried about your health, you are eating junk food, you are not exercising, and that is a risk to you. So rather than mitigating or finding remedy to it, what you are doing is you are taking an insurance policy. So in case if there is a problem with your health, insurance policy is there to help you. So this is not nothing but transference. So lastly, an acceptance. So not fixing a risk is nothing but an acceptance. This is an appropriate cases where the risk is clearly low and the time and effort it takes to fix the risk costs more than the cost that would be incurred if the risk were to be solved. So it is like, you know, that risk is not that important, and if you want to try to solve it, it is taking a huge amount of time. So what we do is we accept that risk, we do not solve it. So an example could be, you have identified a vulnerability on a server but concluded that there is nothing sensitive on that server. So you know that there is a vulnerability on that server but nothing sensitive, so even if someone tries to go in, he won't get anything that important. So basically we are accepting that we are not patching that particular server. So this is acceptance. Apart from this, whatever your natural calamities are there, so you know that the natural calamity is a risk to your organization. What if an earthquake hits? So in that case, that is beyond your control, so those risks we accept it. So I hope you have understood the entire process of your risk management process. It starts with your risk identification, identifying assets, identifying vulnerabilities, threats, controls. Then after we have identified this assets and vulnerabilities, we calculate risk. So you have known the formula for risk, that is risk equal to threat into vulnerability into asset value minus security controls. Then after you have calculated the risk and done the priority, so according to that you apply risk control strategies, that is your remediation, mitigation, avoidance, transference, and acceptance. So this chart you need to understand. So if you are clear with this entire process, it would be very easy for you to actually implement risk management process, or maybe in your exams to solve the questions. So apart from this, there are two more things that we need to talk. So first is communication and next is your rinse and repeat. So communication is like, suppose as a risk manager, you identify a particular risk or asset which is not that important, but it is very important for you to communicate those risks to your stakeholders, because they should be aware of whatever risk, whether it is minute or major. It might happen that some risk is very major and you know that it is beyond control, so what you are doing is you're trying to avoid it, but it is very important that you communicate all this risk to the stakeholders. They might not be a technical person, but a report should be sent to them. So the next is rinse and repeat. So rinse is nothing but again going through all the process and checking if you have missed something, and repeating the process after certain interval of time. So for example, if it is just a development company, so you can do risk management process on yearly basis. But if it is a cloud computing based company where your data centers are there, so it is very risky. So in that case, you might do your risk management process in 2 months or maybe in every month. So depending upon your organization, you need to plan your risk management process. So I hope that you have understood the entire risk management process properly, and you will be able to solve any case study given to you. So these are the few references from which I have referred the data and images. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask and post it in a comment box. I'll be happy to solve them. So thank you guys for your patience listening. Happy learning.